Hey, how you doing? I'm the cleanup hitter, I guess. So Gary would ask me to speak about the future of journalism, and I said that I'm not really a good prognosticator, and I suggested this alternative title of The Era of Noise and how to counter fake news. Particularly timely, given today's, I don't know if people followed Mark Zuckerberg's hearings today. Anybody give that a look? Topic that came up somewhat in a very lengthy testimony today. So I'll try and go at that in tandem though, and you really can't talk about the future of journalism without talking about Facebook and social media, given that most people get at least some of their news every day in this country and around the world on that social network, a different kind of social network than the ants. So let's define some terms first though. In what I teach here at Stanford, I teach news reporting and writing fundamentals classes in addition to a foreign correspondence seminar, a higher level class in the spring quarter. And I always start my first class though with just defining what is news. So let's just define news and the opposite, fake news, while we're at it, so we can sort of have some common terms. Last night, was anybody at the Ted Koppel event last night on campus, Cardinal Conversations? So they had Ted Koppel, Ann Applebaum, who writes about, is this mic okay? Am I holding it too close for echo? It's okay. Ann Applebaum, who covers Russian disinformation in opinion pieces for the Washington Post, and Jessica Lessin, who's the founder of The Information, a tech news site. And Mike McFall, the moderator, started the evening with this question. And I didn't feel like they really nailed it. So news, for the purposes of our discussion, is new or noteworthy information, especially about recent events that has impact or relevance for a certain group of people. And when I talk about news tonight, I'm talking about credible news reported by real trained journalists. Now what is fake news, which we've had endless coverage about, and thinking about, and wondering about how it impacted our election? It's basically fictional content posting as real news, okay? And if we look at a place like Facebook or Twitter likewise, but let's just use Facebook's own definition. News articles that purport to be factual, but which contain intentional misstatements of fact with the intention to arouse passions, attract viewership, or deceive. Now, of course, we've always had this kind of news, right? You've always had conspiracy theories. I remember thinking, recently about, the 9/11 conspiracy theories in 2001, right? From the World Trade Center, all these horrific things, which were just crazy. And now, 17 years later, we've got similar kinds of hoaxes, conspiracy theories that are no longer residing in some dark, remote corner of the internet, but are being shared repeatedly on social media. And I'm starting to think that maybe Facebook needs to get rid of the share button on news. It's actually something I've discussed with some people over there because it's amplifying these kinds of stories. So again, and really, you've all sort of looked at sort of the fake news stories that came out and corrupted the 2016 election. The Pope endorsed Trump, right? Do you guys remember that one? A little bit? It was originally published by something called WTOE5 News, real reliable, made-up news source. And it started being spread, let's just say by November 8th, it had 960,000 what you call Facebook engagements. Now imagine if Facebook had stopped that from circulating after it hit 10,000 or something. So one of the ideas that's being talked about didn't get raised, it wasn't raised today, it wasn't the subject of today's hearings, but how to stop these things from surfacing and getting that many shares. I know that's something that they're considering. You had all kinds of stuff. Hillary was funded by ISIS. All of these things made it into the news ecosystem. So we'll come back to that, but I just wanted to get that out of the way, and I want to make a few points generally about journalism and the news that I'm thinking about here at Stanford as a journalist and also now as an educator. And I want to focus on this paradox that consumes me, which is namely that in this amazing era of unprecedented access to information from any corner of the globe, we're living in this really unprecedented era of noise. And why this is a constant question, I'm not a big PowerPoint person, I'm just putting this up for kicks, so you have something to look at besides me. I just think it's very consequential because I don't see how our democracy can function if we don't restore respect for credible fact-based journalism. And I'll explain in a minute some of the theoretical ideas I have about how we can do that. But let's talk a little bit about some of the problems. So problem number one. everyone's a publisher now. We've gotten rid of these guys for a large part, right? Who's here, okay? The gatekeepers, fewer of them. Anyone with a laptop and an internet connection can produce something that's, and this has eroded, I would say, people's abilities to really sift through, figure out what's credible and what's not. News brands that engage in the real journalistic process with editors and reporters and standards, they're not valued anymore. My students here at Stanford even, they're more inclined when you ask them, what do they trust? They trust the platforms. They'll trust what they get from Apple News. They trust from, I'm sorry, does this sound weird? It sounds weird? For me, word about feedback. And sort of how do we get people to appreciate what these real news outlets are when everybody's publishing, we're flooded with this information. And I think, last night when Ted Koppel was speaking, there was some pushback on what he was saying, and I almost felt like there was this, like, I don't know, those of you that were there, kind of collective eye-rolling at some of what he was saying, that we're not going back to the Ted Koppel days. But in fact, just last month, it turns out, if the reporting is right, Netflix has decided that they're going to develop a new weekly news magazine because, quote, according to a story about this, it has spotted a hole in the market for a current affairs TV show encompassing both sides of the political divide, and they're seeking to fill it. That's precisely what Nightline did for nearly 30 years, right? So maybe, I'm still thinking we need a few more of these gatekeepers to make them, to come back. Now, the second problem that's happened, I think, is that the rise of social media as a news referral site. Most of my students, and frankly, most people in general, are reading what their friends and peers refer to them. That idea of getting a daily news diet where you read this audience, of course, is doing it still, but many people are not. Making sure they get all the news they need every day by going deliberately to a newspaper, digital or paper, and reading an array of news that's just not happening as much. And so when you have people relying on shares or thinking that what's credible is that's a sign of credibility, how many likes or shares, then you have an erosion, right? And so then you get stories like this Opus in the Rolling Stone, which had a very snarky, very big piece about this question ahead of Zuckerberg's testimony. And I know you're not supposed to put big, long, meaty quotes on PowerPoint, but just once upon a time, this is the critical part, a person had to make a conscious decision to pick up a newspaper, turn on the evening news, or buy a magazine. And now news came to you, was even offered to you, suggested in the way a magician offers a card. Okay, so it's an entertainment exhibit, but here's the critical thing. It was your meat and potatoes, you got it all. Now, because of Facebook and all these things, forget about ever seeing or eating your vegetable media again. In the new world, not only will you only see sugar media, but you'll only see your favorite brand of sugar media. Other information, you won't even know it exists. So making sure that people, again, are getting what they really need is a critical challenge also as well. In other words, reversing this passive consumption of news is something I'm very focused on. Another problem we've got, you've probably heard about it a lot, is this decimation of news production. People saw this week. This was just this week of an extraordinary editorial in the Denver Post, going after their New York City owners and saying, look, this is how we used to be, this is how we are now, you're killing us. And so there's an impact on that, and it relates to accountability journalism. Not as many people covering the city council meetings in Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and all these things, but there's another impact that I'm very focused on. And it's that people don't know journalists anymore. They don't know us. It's like we've become some alien creature that can be demonized as fake, or as the president said, what he called there's so many things he said, the enemy of the state, right? So when you don't have contact with local journalists, it's easier to sort of disregard credible fact-based news as fake. So that's something I'm also thinking about. How do we, restore some of this, but also increase those interactions in the communities? Then we have this problem number 4, in this whole journalism area of media illiteracy. And it relates to others. We gave everybody this technology, the smartphone, and we gave kids that. But now people don't know what they're looking at. They don't have the cues. I was going to bring my regular A section of the New York Times and just remind people that there are cues built into that, right? Like the lead story is on the right column. You know where the news is. You know the international, national, and then you have the opinion pages at the end, right? It's all very clearly marked, and it's flattened now. So that's a problem that I think is contributing to some of this distrust of the media. Now here's the thing, I think it's relatively easy to teach people how to determine what's fake and what's real. And you can just sort of, like as this study here, which you can go and read from Sam Weinberg at the School of Ed here, he talks about reading this way. Okay, you see this, you never heard of it, let's Google this, let's figure out what this website is. Is it real or fake? Are mainstream media reporting this story? You can verify photos and Google images, but how many people are going to take the time to do this on every story, right? It's a lot to ask of a consumer. So we need the platforms in particular, like Facebook, to do a better job of getting rid of just bunk, made up stuff. And one of the things that Jessica said last night on the panel that I liked was thinking of it like spam. We used to all have spam, right? Now we don't have spam anymore. They fixed it. So we need to really work on reducing the amount of fake news and hoaxes that penetrate our feeds, because it's about to get a lot worse, right? I mean, in this audience, people will know what's coming down the pike, I'm sure, with video manipulation and audio manipulation, and that too is going to be really confusing for everyone. So one of my ideas is, how are we going to do all this? And I think that what I'm thinking about is if you teach people, I can teach a version of what I do here at Stanford in news reporting and writing fundamentals. Basically all the, get at all these tasks. What is news? Where do story ideas come from? How do journalists deal with sourcing? The fact that we have attribution rules and accountability, and how they write the story, and how they do interviews, and the ethics and avoiding conflicts of interest and corrections, and pointing out the very simple fact that when you have a mistake, it doesn't make you fake, right? This all get very confusing. That if people understood it, if they had to actually do some journalism, again, it would be a lot harder to attack it. Now, we may have gotten so siloed that this is not going to work, but it's something that I'm thinking about trying. Others are trying to sort of help figure this out. I mean, some things that Facebook's trying to do, for example, are can you label, right, like food nutrition labels for news? So one of the problems with labeling is, first of all, they say, who's the labeler? Are they conservative? Are they liberal? And all these things. There's that problem. But then it makes sense you have to label an infinite amount of material, because then if something's not labeled, someone might assume that it's true, or they won't even know how to regard it. So you have that problem. They've experimented with making it more that you can see the logo, like the identifiable logo of the New York Times or the Washington Post, but the logos don't mean anything to millennials really. They don't have that kind of brand recognition, so that's not really helping. So that's a big area that I think is worth watching. Now there's this other problem of a lot of tweeting going on right now. A lot of reporters tweeting. Do any of you follow reporters here on Twitter? I mean, there's a lot of, and when you're tweeting, so when I worked at Bloomberg back in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, covering the State Department, there was a no social media rule. Now, of course, it was still more in its infancy back then, but you could not. There was no way. We were banned from doing it. Now, every journalist is branded by their, the majors, I'm talking the national journalists. And I think that this may be something that they need to rethink. This is from Dean Baquet, the executive editor of the New York Times, where he talks about the risks of tweeting too much. Social media presents potential risks for the Times. If our journalists are perceived as biased, or if they engage in editorializing on social media, that can undercut the credibility of the entire newsroom. So I think there needs to be some reflection on what's going on. If you want to tweet something, tweet out your story, but don't really express an opinion. Now, a lot of good things are happening. On the positive side, there's a lot of good things happening in journalism right now. I mean, look what's going on. There's just scoop after scoop from the New York Times and the Washington Post. They're investing incredible amounts of resources in international reporting, which is what I care deeply about, telling international stories. And they're doing investigative. I mean, this is all happening. And everyone is exploring and experimenting with new storytelling, modern formats, to try and engage more audiences. So in terms of the future of journalism, I think we're going to see just a lot more, I mean, a lot of video. I think Jerry Mieglitz, my colleague, is going to be doing one of these talks about that, about video, virtual reality, augmented reality, drones, really focusing on which format. We have more formats now to tell different kinds of stories, and not every format works with every story. So you really have an opportunity to experience a lot of good journalism. Now, one of the things that I think at the core, though, is that first we all have to sort of figure out a way to get the same set of facts every day, right? And so one of the things I want to talk to Stanford president about, if I ever had the opportunity, was I would love to see every Stanford freshman, when they get here, that they get a digital news subscription to a major, credible, fact-based news outlet. It's $1 a month for a student. You want the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever. And when I raised this issue in class the other day, I had a student say, but that, it's going to be tainted as like the liberal media, or you can't have those news outlets. And I literally lost my mind, because it's even become partisan to discuss the idea that, or to advocate the idea that everybody should be reading a mainstream newspaper every day. I mean, this is how far we've gotten in terms of thinking about these issues. So I'm still going to push that idea. So some questions to think about as you go into the evening. Who's really responsible? Who's responsible for making sure that we have quality journalism, informed public? I think there's a lot of people who are. For fixing our broken journalism revenue models, a lot of us have a role in that. For regulating social media platforms. Honestly, my mind is racing right now on this third one after watching the hearings today, because the senators displayed a real, what's the word I'm thinking of? Ignorance of how these platforms work. And so I'm not sure they're going to be equipped to do any regulating, but for another day. And then educating our children to be smart digital consumers. I was really pleased that I got a call from the Waldorf School in San Francisco after they heard me speak on some of these issues on the radio. Please come talk to our school about this issue. Now, this is a Waldorf school in San Francisco. Like, these kids are going to be well on their way understanding these issues. But I can tell you, the Stanford students that I teach, they don't get any media digital literacy in high school, wherever they came from. This is not considered a core part of the curriculum, as is science and English and math and all those other things. And I really think it should be, because I don't know what we're going to do if kids can't vet information properly. What can you do in this area? Teach yourself how to spot fake news. I imagine you probably already do, but there's Google a tutorial if you want some quick tips. I mean, it's easy to get duped. It really is. So something that we can all do. Teach your friends. Subscribe. Contribute. Public media. Reach out to a journalist. I like this idea of doing more in-person meetups with journalists around the country, wherever you live. Encourage teaching of media literacy. And urge your congressional reps, I've added this, to fight back about Trump's demonization of the news media, because it's really going unanswered. This past week you saw this story about Sinclair News. You guys see this video about that Deadspin put together of Sinclair-owned TV networks having to read from a certain script. And deans and heads of journalism schools across the country wrote a letter in protest together. Like they said, this is unacceptable, and explained why. There's really no pushing back on the fake news narrative that the president's pushing out. I think it's very dangerous for journalists. So you're just going to have more and more of this. This is just a typical Trump tweet about how the media makes up stories. This is a pretty tame one for him, actually. So you can do all those things that I suggested, and maybe we'll make some progress. At the end of the day, this guy, he may have the most influence of everyone. So we'll see what happens at tomorrow's hearings. Thank you.
Okay, questions, yes?
Do you need this back now? Here.
Yeah, this...
Or we get small enough?
Well, I mean, okay, this is no question. Comment, question, whatever. But so if you ever write a book on the history of fake news, you have to start way back in time, right? Mm-hmm. Just to consider that essentially Mussolini, Stalin, who produced fake news and forced them with violence, and people didn't really believe that. Mm-hmm. Then you have a phenomenon, it's a little underestimated in the United States, that's Al Jazeera. Mm-hmm. That was not really a state enforcing fake news, but was extremely efficient at producing fake news and spreading them like wildfire all over the Islamic world, even in the West. And then you have social media and all. What we say about social media to me is very similar to what you guys say about Al Jazeera. So you don't really need Facebook to convince people of fake news. You need to tell people what people actually want to hear. So I want different comments. So there's a lot of psychology behind this, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, Mussolini and Stalin were very bad psychologists.
Yeah, I mean, the point I'm just making is that, I mean, that's what I'm saying, of course Mussolini and Stalin, everybody like real pro at this, and different technological methods for distribution in different eras, but the platforms are, and it's not only Facebook, I mean, it's Twitter and YouTube, to the point that Facebook will make us, well, if we went away, we've got, Twitter's got 3,000 employees total, Facebook has 15,000, about 20,000, just gonna be doing security, okay? So they are actually trying to work on solutions for this. My point is simply that the platforms just amplify it. Now, and the problem with the way that Facebook built, as you know, is that you circulate to your friends what they want to hear, what you're saying. So if they want to hear an or they want to read an InfoWars story because it reflects their point of view or the way they want reality to be, that's going to get circulated. To me, Facebook, it's not built to do this. It's not. They're holding on for dear life to the idea that they're a neutral technology platform, even though they're a primary source of news. I think they just have to get out of the news business completely and remind people that they're every day that don't get news from us because they can't do this right, given the way they share the sharing function works.
So, just an observation, and just want to see if you buy into this line of thinking. And forgive me, I'm not a journalist. I'm just